I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Courtney Eccles, who's going to present the slides on the screen and speak to us from the phone. Courtney, are you with us?
Yes, thanks, Sarah. Can you hear me?
We can, thank you.
Awesome. Hopefully I'm zooming from some really loud speakers and I'm just hearing voices already from afar. I want to thank everyone today, specifically Sarah and Lisa and AARP for putting this wonderful event together. I'm incredibly disappointed that I wasn't able to be there in person with all of you, but really excited to be able to share our experiences in Illinois with the Illinois Secure Choice Program and the work that we've done over the last few years to fully launch and implement a program that, as Sarah indicated, will help over 1.2 million private sector workers here begin saving their own money for retirement. So I'm going to dive in, and I know we just have a wealth of information and experts on this panel, so I'll kind of slide through some of these slides, but hopefully give you a sense of what we're doing in Illinois, how things are looking so far, and then a few considerations for you as you think about some of the best methods to really craft your legislation and your program, some of the lessons learned that we've had over the course of the last few years. So really quickly to just give you some background, and I know Lisa is going to cover this more broadly when looking at all of the states that have already implemented programs. When you look at Illinois Secure Choice, at the core of it, we're working with Illinois employers that have 25 or more employees, have been in business for at least 2 years, and do not offer a qualified retirement plan. So that is the set of employers that our statute and law impacts. And as I mentioned already, through those employers, we'll enable at least 1.2 million workers to gain access to a workplace-based savings option. If you happen to hear a siren behind me, it's because we've been doing fire drills in our state building all day long, so my apologies for that. In terms of the administrative features of Secure Choice, as you can see on the slide, the program is overseen by a 7-person bipartisan board. The treasurer serves as chair of that board, and so that's why we do a lot of the administrative support and function here through the treasurer's office. You'll hear in a minute from Lisa, who represents Census. That is our private sector financial services firm that conducts all of the administration, client services, record keeping, facilitating our investment managers, kind of all of the day-to-day operations. A couple other key components for our program. It is required to be self-sustaining in the long run once it's up and fully implemented. We did receive some startup funding from the state, and we'll continue to get a little bit of money each year to get us to the point of being self-sustaining, but very similar to how college 529 programs operate. In and of itself, it's not something that will require state funding in perpetuity. And finally, another really important aspect, within our state statute, our fees are capped at 75 basis points all in. So that includes our administrative fees, both to the state and the program administrator, as well as our investment fees. I'm going to spend just a little bit of time here because you guys have probably talked about sort of overall program design. But when we look at Illinois Secure Choice, because it's an auto enrollment program for workers, we obviously had to have a set of defaults in place. These are really consistent across the programs, but we utilize a Roth IRA, a 5% contribution rate, and a default target date fund option. Of course, savers can make modifications, they can lower or increase their contribution rate, and we do offer a few other investment options in a somewhat limited lineup for workers or savers to choose from. I really like this slide. For me, it's incredibly important. We talk about it all the time with employers, especially now as we're continuing to educate folks who are impacted by the program. When I look at Secure Choice and when I think about qualified plans, there are really some key differences between the programs, and it's important for employers to know and understand that. When it comes to Secure Choice and the other state-administered IRAs, there's really sort of a 3-step process. Employers register for the program, which is really where they just go on, verify their employer information, set up their own account. They enroll their employees into the program, which involves an upload of employee information, and then they set up the payroll deductions and on an ongoing basis remit contributions. The rest of the management is all handled by Secure Choice, and it's not something that employers have to really play any role in. So employers don't pay any fees annually, initially, at any point in time. they're not considered plan managers and they're not subject to ERISA. So they don't play the employer-sponsored role that you see with say, a qualified plan. Actually, under federal rules, employers cannot make matches or contributions because these are individual retirement accounts. And they don't have the same sort of administrative requirements that you would see with an employer-sponsored plan. So a little bit about our timing in Illinois. We passed our statute in 2015 and then spent a couple of years with our board really digging into program design, putting out our RFPs to secure a program administrator, and then finally getting the structure up and running. So as you see on this timeline, we launched our program with a small pilot in the spring and summer of 2018. We worked with a small set of employers across the state, and for us, it was a learning experience to modify, improve, tweak our system. We've then made our way through 2 of 3 waves. So our largest employers in Illinois began facilitation of the program last fall. Our second wave was July, this summer of this year, with mid-sized employers. And then, as you can see from our final arrow, we are in the midst of wave 3, which is our smallest employers, that subset that goes all the way down to those businesses that have about 25 employees. We're incredibly excited. It's been a very, very busy summer and fall, but as you can see on that last bullet there, with wave 3, we sent out about 23,000 notices to employers in Illinois and are working our way through helping them either indicate that they're exempt because they already offer a plan, or helping them to facilitate the program and begin onboarding their employees. So I know it sounds like you got a lot of numbers earlier, but I'm really excited about these numbers. It's what we're currently seeing in the midst of our program rollout. So right at the top there, for me, the most important number is really related to how many folks we have saving and watching that number grow on a daily basis. So as you can see, we're over 30,000 funded accounts. We have savers in every single county in Illinois, and we're really excited about the growth that we've seen there. In total, our savers have together over $7.4 million. And then diving into sort of the weeds a little bit here, I think what you'll see is really something that continues to prove the point that this is a different set of savers than what you might see in the traditional qualified space. So I'm going to kind of bounce around a little bit here, but a key one is if you look at our average monthly contribution amount, we're sitting at right about $80 a month. So in general here, we're talking about lower and middle income workers, but this number has remained fairly steady and increased a little bit as we've moved through our rollout. The average funded account balance is $242. I will add the caveat that because we are literally in the midst of our implementation, some of our accounts are going to have a lot more than that, and some of them are going to have anywhere from $40 to $80 because they've just onboarded and just made their first payroll. So that's kind of a tricky number. Looking at our average deferral rate, this one is really exciting for me because, as you know, the default is 5%. And so what we're seeing here is that folks may be lowering that amount, but they also may be increasing it, which to me is a real sign of engagement and folks who are excited about the opportunity to save. And then looking at the last few numbers, you can see we have about 63% of the population who is remaining in the program and about 37% that are opting out, either during our 30-day opt-out window or before or right after that first paycheck, and then they take that money back. And the final number, which again, something that's growing considerably day by day, we have just under 3,000 registered employers who are in the program now. But as I mentioned, because we're in the midst of wave 3, that number is growing in a really exciting way. I'm going to fly through these last few slides because I want to get to both Lisa and Andrea. But one thing I did want to spend a little bit of time talking about is some of the things that were part of our law from the get-go, but also some of the lessons and thoughts that we've learned along the way. So I won't dive into detail on each one of these, but for me, these are really some key considerations as you think about what you'd like to include in legislation in statute when you're designing a program like this. So when it comes to the mandate or the requirement, for me, the key here really is, are you going to have an employee threshold? Ours is 25, which is pretty high. Oregon and California are both lower. How are you going to define employee and employer? Are there things that you can do in terms of existing laws that North Carolina already has that you can really build on? That makes it so much easier for employers when you get to the implementation phase. When you're looking at default, here's, I would really say, if you're able to give your board or your agency or whatever entity is going to run the program, give them some flexibility. I think, we can all appreciate that having to go back and make changes to a very specific law can be tricky, and these are new programs that involve some learning along the way. When it comes to program structure and as well as budget and startup costs, I feel really fortunate that our new program has a governing board, but also has the support and structure of a constitutional office like the Treasurer's Office. So I think it's a model that works really nicely. You've got a board that's separate that can provide some oversight, but you have some structure and staff support and potentially some resources that you can build on or leverage as you're moving forward and actually implementing a program. And that's really a cost saver in a lot of ways. So it might be helpful when you're thinking about how you can kind of limit some resources up front and build on resources you already have. A couple other key items, thinking about enforcement and data. I would just say if you're able to add some language from the get-go, that makes it really helpful. It's hard to have a program with a requirement if you don't at least have some level of enforcement later on. So if you're able to include that from the get-go, I certainly would. And another key piece that maybe seems really basic, but it's actually something we had to go back to our legislature to fix, and that's data. There's only probably a few state agencies that have full employer data with the number of employees and their contact information. So really starting to think about how you can partner with them early on and make it so they're able to share that information with the program is really helpful. And then finally, you can take a look here, but from a program design standpoint, we've really found that being less prescriptive and providing some flexibility to your entity or agency or board is definitely helpful. Last page, just a few things to think about. And to me, in my mind, the fact that you're already gathering and meeting together is a sign that you're already thinking about who the partners in the space are, what business groups, what stakeholders, what nonprofit organizations, which governmental agencies and staff can all be working together from the beginning. I think it allows you to get better ideas, better thoughts, and just a broader set of folks who are excited about the opportunity to really make a difference with a program like this. And then I would just add that one thing I think that's really exciting for states that are just starting to move forward is these programs aren't theoretical anymore. They exist. We're here. We're excited to be partners in this space. Happy to always share our lessons learned, things we wish we could do differently, but also to be models for the fact that their programs are up, running, and there's a lot to be learned. So I just kind of dove through that, but happy to pass it on and answer questions if you have them later.
It's my privilege to be here with you this afternoon, and I appreciate everyone's presence, spending some time on this important topic. And I'll just take a couple moments to talk a little bit about a census. I will say this, my favorite thing to say is it's a census, not the census. I have had that, I've had people ask me if I could just fix a couple questions before. So, and I'm going to scoot this down because it just feels like it's coming between us. So a couple of things that I'll mention along the way about a census. So we do work with three live state programs. So part of what I want to share with you this afternoon is our experience with these programs. And I think Courtney's done a really terrific job of sharing some of the inside view of the Illinois Secure Choice program. And I will mention with regard to a census a couple things like record keepers. Typically we are behind the scenes. We're not very visible. Our job is to make sure that everything works really well, not to grab the limelight. So if you haven't heard of us, I'm not too surprised. But I will mention that as a 40 years young company, a Census is one of America's, or actually the America's, largest independent record keeper and third-party administrators for retirement plans. And we are serving over 75,000 plans in the US and more than 1.6 million IRAs and HSAs. So we did bring a little experience to this space, although I will also say we brought some experimental to the space, as did everybody else, which is we all knew going in that we were going to bring in some things that everybody had a lot of experience with, but we were all going to be doing them together in some new ways. And so I'll talk a little bit about that today. And then I think maybe Andrea mentioned this. So before coming to a census about a year and a half ago, I actually worked at Oregon for the state treasurer, helping to stand up the Oregon Saves program. So I've had a foot in each camp at this point. So we're going to look at some things today. We've covered a certain amount of ground, and so I'm going to try not to repeat too much of some of the important things that you've already seen. But let me just start by talking a little bit. I'm going to put all this up here so we can look at it at the same time. So when we think about just ingredients for an adequate retirement, some of the important elements that folks need are they need availability of a retirement account for them. Automatic enrollment into the retirement account is super helpful. Keeping investment easy. Investment is one of the things that stops a lot of people from moving forward. Is also very important. Automatic increase, or I almost said decrease. Automatic increase of the deferral rates is also a very important tool to continue to get people from where they're able to save today to the higher level that they're able to save tomorrow, because they actually can, as Emery started to mention. And then lifetime income streams are increasingly a space that people are focusing on. And again, as Angela mentioned, not just how much money I have in my account, but what's it going to do for me? $100,000 sounds like a ton of money, but I need to divide that by the number of years I'm going to be in retirement, or whatever my account balance is. We need to start thinking about the money a little bit differently. So, in our experience, all of these elements are very important. And one of the things I'll mention, so I was having a chat with a millennial earlier today, and one of the things the millennial said was, I'm never going to be able to retire. I'm not planning to retire. I've got student debt. I don't have the ability to save today. And, I don't think Social Security is going to be there for me either. So kind of not a happy future thought, but I think as we consider what might actually happen, what if that person were working for an employer who was facilitating a state-based program if they didn't already offer some other form of retirement plan? What if that person got automatically scooped up so that they were saving a small amount of their current income, even if their current income is small? If they get scooped up, and this person is a graduate student here in town, even if they get scooped up very early in their career, in fact, those dollars that go in early on become pretty critical later on in life. So those are, from an opportunity standpoint, that's one of the things for us to think about. So as we've touched on, there are a variety of different models that the states are looking at when they're thinking about how to improve retirement security in the state. So we start with marketplace. There are also the state-run multiple employer plans, state-sponsored prototype plan, which nobody has in place at this point in time, and the auto IRAs. And I'm going to spend my time talking about the auto IRA programs and some of our experience there. But I think also, as you are considering for North Carolina what is right, take a look at the other models, take a look across the models, and take a look at what the experience is, because I think that's really important. I'm not here to recommend A, B, C, or D, but I think from a North Carolina perspective, you're going to want to think about what's important in the state and how do you really create impact. So let's revisit a couple of the characteristics that Courtney mentioned, things that are part of an auto IRA program. So first, one of the most critical things, why do we call it automatic? Why do we call it auto IRA? So it's because employees, when employers are facilitating, they get scooped up. They're automatically enrolled unless they opt out. So they obviously have that choice and the ability to opt out. There are not any employer contributions. So that's, you might consider that to be a plus minus. If employers want to contribute, they still have the option to establish a plan if they don't have one already. But for the auto IRA programs, because again, we're talking about IRA accounts, employers are not contributing to the IRA accounts. The employees are responsible for their own investments, but typically what you'll find is they're pretty simple, very streamlined investment menus. I can say that one of our goals in Oregon, and I think this continues to be a goal for the state, is that anyone on any street corner could understand what was being offered to them, right? So there's an age-based investment choice. There is a, investment choice that's focused on capital preservation or, more safety. So the concepts here are not to give people, 35 or 40 options, but to keep it streamlined and very effective on their behalf. So not only are they able to make a good choice, but they know what that choice is all about for them. And then we'll be touching a little bit on the programs that are available in Oregon, Illinois, and California. One of the things I want to mention, just backing up to the employer side, so employers are not making contributions, but what does the employer need to do? So their role is very simple, a small administrative function, which really has to do with making themselves known to the program, so registering for the program, providing enough workforce information that the program can reach out to covered employees, and then for those who choose to save, facilitating the payroll deduction. So the programs have worked very hard to keep this employer element super, super simple, and then maintaining that roster. So let's just take a look across the three programs. What do they look like across these characteristics? One of the things you'll see is they're pretty similar to each other. So I'll point out a couple of the differences, but let me start with things that are the same. And by the way, these things are flexible. So again, as Angela mentioned, in North Carolina, you might look at this differently if you were looking at a program like this. But so far, these three states have chosen a similar default investment rate, or default savings rate, I should say, of 5%. The standard IRA type is a Roth IRA. Traditional is offered or intended to be offered through the programs as an election or a choice that people can make. And by the way, feedback, so we talked a little bit earlier about opt-outs. In some of the feedback we've gotten, a very tiny percentage, so less than 1% of potential savers have said, I make too much money to save in a Roth IRA. So there will be some out there that are at income levels that don't allow them to save in a Roth. But it's a pretty small percentage. So let's talk about some of the differences. So first, which employers are actually covered under the programs. So you'll see that Oregon's program is the most inclusive, if you think of it that way, which is that employers with any employees, so if you have employees in Oregon and you're not offering a plan, you are included in Oregon Saves. Either so if you're not offering a plan, I think I already said that, you'll be facilitating Oregon Saves. And Oregon started its program in July of 2017 on a pilot basis and has been rolling out in waves since then. So a chunk of employers and workers every 6 months over a 3-year period. We were being conservative. It actually turns out we were being more conservative than we had to be, but we wanted to make sure we didn't get it wrong early on. Illinois is on the other end of the spectrum currently, where Illinois has drawn the line at 25 or more employees for employers, and Illinois is rolling out faster over about a 1-year period of time. So by the end of this year, all eligible employers will be should be in the program. And then California is in the middle, drawing that line at 5 employees. And so that's a state-specific criteria where the state determines what's right for us. Eligibility, age 18. Auto increase, you'll see some variations here. All 3 programs have auto increase, but they've all looked at it slightly differently. In Oregon, there's an auto increase 1% a year from 5% to 10% for people who don't opt out of that, and it's based on a 6-month look back. So the auto increase happens in January, and if you've been in the program 6 months or more, then you'll be automatically escalated to the next level. If you've been in 4 months, you're not going to be escalated, or 4 days, you're not going to be escalated. In California, it's 1% up to 8%, and currently in Illinois, it's you opt into auto escalation. And also, the only program that's had auto escalation yet is Oregon. Oregon's gone through the auto escalation, so I'll show you some numbers in terms of impact on the program and the savings rate in just a second. You also see some differences across the investment rates. So in both Oregon and California, the first $1,000 that gets saved into a person's account goes into basically capital preservation or a money market fund. Everything after that goes into an age-based or target date fund. So the idea is you're getting into your target date fund or your age-based fund, but you've got this sort of safety cushion that you keep along the way. So if the market is, going up or down dramatically, that's going to be muted for you. And especially Murphy's Law, we were pretty sure like we're going to start this big program and then the market's going to go, in the toilet. So one of the things that allows is it allows a little safety cushion. And then after, typically for most people, 6 to 9 months worth of earnings and savings is when they then start to step into the market, $50 at a time, because that's the average of what people are saving. In Illinois, the concept is applied a little bit differently. So it's rather than a kind of safety corridor of an amount of money, it's a safety corridor of amount of time. So 90 days, and then everything goes into the person's target date or age-based fund. So those are really the primary differences are which employers and which chunk of the workforce is covered, how does auto increase work, and what do the investment menus look like. Apart from that, pretty consistent across the 3 programs. So how's it going? I know Courtney shared some numbers, but let me share a couple more with you. And in fact, I'll just give you the consolidated numbers across Oregon, Illinois, and California. So today, there are about 85,000 people saving across the 3 programs. And I just want to stop for a second, because that feels amazing. Honestly, it feels really good that from 2.5 years ago to now, 85,000 more people have funded accounts. The average account balance is about $485, so getting close to a $500 level. The early savers in the Oregon program have well more than $2,000 in their accounts. So if you've seen some of those, I think might have been an Atlantic Monthly article a couple years back that said, like most of us don't have $400 to scrape together if we needed to go pay for something. All these folks have now put themselves out of that realm and are not in that realm. So much better position to be in. So $85,000 in aggregate, they've saved about $41 million. Now, for some of us, when we work in financial services, we're used to numbers that start with a B, like everything is a billion, right? So 41 million doesn't sound like that much money, but in fact, when it's all saved $50 at a time for people where it's making a very significant difference for them, that's very important. There are about 11,800 employers who are registered and beginning to facilitate these programs currently. And as we talked about, the average savings across the 3 programs is about $50 a month, or $50 a check, or about $100 a month. One of the differences you'll see, so an interesting thing that we were not expecting to see, so when you set that savings rate at 5%, like the first question everybody asked was, is that going to work? We think it's going to work, but is it going to work for people? And the actual experience has been that when people start saving, most people, first of all, when they get automatically enrolled, most of them don't touch it. And you may have had that experience in the private sector with 401k and other types of retirement plans. And I think Emory showed very nicely, if you start them out at 3%, they also don't touch it, right? So when you start them out at 5%, typically they're not going to make a change. Some will, and that's probably running maybe 15% of people will go in and change their savings rate currently, which I think is a good thing because it means they're paying attention. And so when they change it, they may go lower, so about 2/3 will save less if they go in and do anything, and they'll save 4, 3, 2, or 1%. And the other third save more. So interestingly, when they save more, they save in chunks of 5%. So they go from 5 to 10 to 15, 20, 50, and 100. There are some people saving 100% of their comp, which means that's not their only source of income, clearly, and they're probably trying to make up for some lost time. But on average, that leads to numbers like the ones that Courtney mentioned. So in Illinois, the current average is running right about 5.2, 5.119, 5.2%. In Oregon, now that we've had the first auto escalation, you had a big chunk of people that got escalated up to 6%, so the average is about 5.5, kind of bounces around between 5.5 and 5.6%. So, this is the live experience. This is what's really happening for folks, and it's making a big difference. We touched a little bit about opt-out rates earlier in the conversation, and opt-out rates are running 26, 27, 29%. They vary a little bit across programs. And I think everyone's sort of interest is to see how will that change over time. And again, I think one of the things that's good about it is it shows that people are paying attention, right? They are making an active choice and they know they have the ability to make an active choice. I would like to think that over time, as people become more familiar, and this is just part of the water, like you turn out the lights when you leave the room, that this is something else that people feel very comfortable doing. But I think we have to be realistic about that. It's going to take some time to get there, right? This is new. So think about, I don't know if many of you remember the first time you were ever offered a 401k plan. I do, because I have been working for 30 years. So I was like, what? They want me to put my own money into an account for later, and it's not going to be in my paycheck. Like, there was a little learning curve there. The same with college savings plans. ABLE, I think, has gone a little bit faster, but we can expect that there's a little bit of a learning curve and some awareness as well. So a couple things to think about along the way. From a design standpoint, did I get all that on there? From a design standpoint, there are a couple of things, regardless of the things that you study and the direction you consider going in. You want to think a little bit about program governance. So from I'm going to speak about this from an auto IRA perspective. The 3 programs that I touched on, each of them has a board, each of them has treasury staff that are supporting them. That staff ranges in size from maybe a couple of people to as many as 7 people, depending on the size of the program. You do want to think about the costs of establishing and maintaining the program. A really good way to do that is to have an expert or a set of experts create some feasibility analysis for the state to give good thought to, based on your population and the model you select. How much is it going to take to get it started? What will you need for the state? What might you need for a service provider or service providers? How long will it take you to achieve break even? So those are some things to think about from the standpoint of establishing and maintaining. I will say, so now that we've all been about this for roughly 3 years, we went in on a shoestring, some of us. And I would just reconsider that. This is really important. We've been able to get a lot done with a little, but I think that states should be thoughtful about not cutting themselves short. So we talked a little bit about this as well. So whether to include all employers or a subset of employers, what rate of employee contributions makes sense, does auto escalation make sense? And then from an investment option perspective, I'm just going to say this. I'm a reformed investment consultant. Make it fewer. Just make it as simple as you can. So I have some information here on the Oregon experience, but I don't know, I think we'll be making the decks available to people. And so there's information that you can look at on your own and a couple of different things around what did the Oregon timeline look like specifically. I know Courtney's got good information on the Illinois timeline as well. And then we have at the end of that deck, there's some myths and facts, right? There's no good idea that doesn't have opposition. And so it behooves you, as you are looking at this pathway, to think about what are the things people are going to be concerned about, what do you know about them, and how do you respond in a really factual way.
I can't tell you guys how excited I am to be here today and how really happy I am to have gotten this invitation from the AARP. First of all, one thing I want to say is that I come at this and my firm comes at this a little bit differently. We're not retirement people per se, although sitting among our team of professionals are people who ran retirement platforms for major financial institutions, and in fact, even the former chairman of the Virginia retirement system. So we have a lot of understanding of retirement, but what we really do is we really sit back and take these great plans or policy initiatives, and we work with the states to make them happen. And that is the sole thing that we focus on, whether it's helping people save for college, helping people with disabilities save, which is another tax-advantaged program, or helping people save for retirement. You know, Angela said it best when she said, we look to the states. When I think back to the analogies we see for this retirement crisis, I think the 529, the college savings market, is exactly the right one. And that's because it was the states that really recognized the challenges and the real sort of looming crises of the cost of higher education. So the states took those first steps, and it wasn't until the IRS actually sued the state of Michigan on the question of whether or not the program they set up was tax exempt. It wasn't until the state of Michigan won that legislation at the appellate level in the federal court that led Senators McConnell and Graham from Kentucky and Florida to create Section 529 of the Internal Revenue Code. So when we think of it, we think this is so analogous because it is the states, the 43 that Angela referenced before, who've looked at this problem, people like you who are looking at it now, you're recognizing this looming retirement crisis and what it will do to the public fisc. So what we're hopeful of is that we'll see a similar result where the states led the initiatives in education, which then led to the federal solution, and we're hoping that that's what happens here. As the states pound away at it, the feds will realize they need to create something on an advantage level for us. So one of the things, I guess, when I was asked to be part of this panel, we do serve as the program consultant to California. It's been a real honor to work with that team for the past 2 years. So I want to share a little bit about their timeline and their experience. I'm not going to talk about their program. We are missing their leader today, Katie Selensky. There's nobody who speaks better about the ins and outs of California and what it took. But what I want to just share with you is sort of the overall program timeline. And then I want to talk about the parts that I hope will be meaningful for you in terms of governance and procurement. It really is going to echo so many of the things that Lisa has said, Courtney said, Angela said. I also am mindful of the time. I don't know what happened to my clock, but I hate to be the last person between, I have a half hour? I was going to say I hate to be the last person between you all and a drink, and so it is still true. So I'm from New York, I talk fast. Anyway, I wanted to give you this sort of broad timeline of California, and these are sort of the key components that California points to when they talk about a program timeline. It's not lost upon me that actually, and I think people in this group know, California was the first state to really go out in a big way and try to address this problem. It was back in 2012, actually even earlier than 2012. The initial legislation in California was passed in 2012. So we went from 2012 until July of 2019 when the program launched effectively. There was a pilot launch toward the end of 2018. But what I really wanted to get across is that it takes a long time, at least in the case of California. They worked very hard over this period of time of, bringing in a feasibility consultant, bringing in and really undertaking a very extensive market analysis. I mean, it looks like they weren't doing much between 2013 or 2014 and 2016, but in fact they were. When I look back at that period of time, I mean, the board was formed in 2013, but they really undertook this extensive feasibility study. The treasurer, as the designated chairman of what would be the eventual board, really went out and I kind of think of it as crisscrossing the state in reaching out to labor, to business associations, and to community organizations. And I think Angela talked about this, the importance of that outreach and the importance of that stakeholder engagement, which really sets a foundation that allows your program to then be successful. So the feasibility study was completed in about 2016, and the way the California legislation was set up is that they then had to, once the program was determined that it would be feasible, and I should tell you that that feasibility study was paid for largely or entirely by foundation and private sector money. But once that feasibility report was completed, they had to go back and more formally, or I should say really adopt in full the legislation, which then led to the program formation and the program moving on. So key steps are really an executive director, the woman I mentioned, Katie Selensky, was appointed in April of 2017, and then things accelerated. Then things moved quickly because at that point we could move into the what I think of as building the team infrastructure and really starting the program build and securing all of the community support and the key stakeholder support that they needed. So again, it's a 7-year timeline. If you look at it from 2012 to where we are today, our pilot, as I said before, launched toward the end of November of 2018. Program launch was July 1st, and the state is, or I should say the program is really proud of the fact that October 1st, the program became open to the gig workers and the gig economy, and I think that was something that was very important to the board and to California, given the makeup of the California workforce. So then moving from the program, the broad one, I want to share this concept of governance and procurement, because this is that really focus, this is the period we work on, obviously, but this is also that real focus from when you've laid all those foundations, where do we go to get it started? What are those key things we need to do? And when I think of this, and we've kind of color-coded it for you from a couple things. First of all, you've heard a lot of talk about governance, and we'll talk a little bit about that in a couple of slides. But there was a big education emphasis, and that continues in California, at least my experience with the board. But even going back to 2015, it was a great deal of education on investments, on stakeholders and what mattered to stakeholders. Later in the process, we brought in, or the board brought in, industry participants, firms like a Census, so that the board understood what mattered to the companies that would eventually be their partners, like a Census, and help them run these amazing programs. Another key set of advisors was legal counsel, investment consultants, program consultants. So when Lisa refers to the startup costs, and Courtney mentioned this as well, they're not overwhelming, but they're not insignificant either. And I think that it was interesting to hear Lisa say that don't be cheap. Because I think that, maybe you didn't say it exactly like that, but I think the message I took from it was that that's, it is going to cost something to get this program off the ground. I will tell you that from my years of experience in the 529 side, I believe you asked the question about general fund monies, or I'm sorry, I don't know your name, but we've seen, having worked with probably, 40 or 50 different state-run investment programs, so whether it's 529, ABLE, or this, in almost every single instance, there has been a general fund loan for that startup cost, with the expectation that that money would be paid back. So I want to be very clear that in very few instances is it really taxpayers' money. It is almost entirely with the expectation that either it's a zero-interest loan or it's a low-cost loan, but it is a loan, and there is an expectation that that will be paid back over time once the program generates revenues. So then moving on here, I guess the other points I would say, actually, let me take one step. I mentioned board education. You'll see in kind of the October 2017 timeframe up until early of 2018, where we talk about fiduciary training and governance and investments. And that was a really critical time. I think it is a critical time for any new board, new venture to think about, do we understand what our role is? Do we understand what it means to be a fiduciary, right, for other people's money? Because sometimes the way boards are created, you don't always have people who come from that perspective. So that's something that we spent a lot of time on in California, to the point where California adopted governing principles and lives by them. And we see that with other boards that we work with as well. And then very importantly on the investment side, and Lisa as the former investment consultant referred to this, but when you are, and I'll touch on the point you made about a few investment options, but you're largely, as the board that's going to run these programs, is going to offer a set of investments to what we assume are people who haven't necessarily been that involved in the financial sector. So maybe they lack a little bit of savviness about it. And so you or your governing board has to make good decisions, has to make decisions about offering investments that are appropriate. And part of that is really having a set of investment policies and knowing what it is that you're striving for and creating standards that you're going to hold the program to. So I feel a little bit like I beat this page to death, but I really wanted you to, sort of get that sense. You have this overall program timeline, but then when it takes to really just get that program up and running and the concentrated steps, it is a smaller period of time, but it's a very careful, there's a lot going on during it, but it is a time where you set the groundwork and the framework for how that program is going to operate going forward. So again, my comments may seem to have, I've talked a little bit about California specifically. I really want you to know that these are general comments more broadly as well. And again, I would encourage anyone from North Carolina who really wants to delve into the California specific experience to really contact Katie Solinsky on that. So moving on, and I'm going to go quickly because I am mindful that we've covered a lot of this. It is interesting to me how it's funny when we're all sort of covering the same things differently. And how many different ways can we show you what a model looks like? One page I present a little differently, and I think Courtney's made this point, Lisa's made it, because it really does matter where that governance, where that administrative responsibility stands. And one of the things that I think, Angela made the point actually about agency-based models carrying some gravitas. I think Courtney talked about the importance of constitutional office support. So what this shows you is that of the 11 entities, the 10 states and the city of Seattle that have these programs really live or about to be live, it is interesting that, close to 2/3 of them are within a constitutional officer's office. And what I will tell you about that is that gives you an automatic infrastructure, if you will. And where I see the distinction between that and, let's say, the entities that are in a dedicated entity, that's Connecticut probably and Maryland, you go into a treasurer's office and you have office space, you have telephones, you have internet. But more importantly, you have a whole support system that allows you to hit the ground running. And we see that even in, I would say that in Washington State, where the program is placed in the Department of Commerce. So just something to think about, because I think that when you're in an infrastructure that's built, you can move more quickly. That's just, my own observation of it. I guess the one other point I would make on this, and I know Courtney mentioned it, maybe Lisa did as well. I mean, when you are within an existing office, like these treasurer's offices, you do have access not just to the infrastructure, but to resources, to the people to help support you. And I think the staffing that we see there, they range anywhere from 2 people on this staff, probably to 10 or 12 working in California. This is my chart, which I was thinking of. How many different ways can we all show that there are 4 models? So I'm not going to go through it because Angela and Lisa have done a great job sort of highlighting it. What I would draw your attention to, what I think really emphasizes the point Angela made, is that there really is a shifting from the marketplace. We finally took New Jersey off. New Jersey passed a marketplace plan back in, it was one of the last things that Governor Christie signed into law, but it went nowhere. And so more recently, New Jersey has passed this mandatory auto IRA. But I think you're definitely if this chart gives it to you differently at all, it just really shows you that it emphasizes that point that we are seeing more of the auto IRA side. Just a snapshot, again, just programs that are launched, the 5 programs. What's only interesting to me about this is that when we focus on a pilot versus a program launch, it's a very short period of time. It was 3 months in Oregon, 7 months in California. So I think we go into these pilots saying, well, we're going to learn what we can and fix it in the launch. And in fact, there wasn't a lot to fix. I think it's just a matter of the timing. Then on live state programs, and obviously, we've talked a lot about California, Illinois, and Oregon. A couple high points I want to make here. First of all, we do see that a census has really provided a great service or provides the service to California, Illinois, and Oregon. What's interesting, if we look at Washington, I'm giving you where the state administrative responsibility is, so that's the Department of Commerce. Washington actually offers in their marketplace, they offer 2 plans. One offers, a suite of IRA products. The other offers 401k. What's interesting, though, and this goes back to something John Scott talked about this morning, is that in Washington State, one of the 2 providers is actually a firm that solely focuses on the Latino community. So it's just sort of interesting, and I know, and they're committed to being in this field, and we see them across the country, but Washington State has actually picked them up, and all of their marketing is largely keyed to that Hispanic community. It's a great thing to see it. On the investment manager side, the point I want to make goes back to something Lisa said about keeping it simple. This is a pretty simple lineup of investment managers. Right? You see a lot of consistency. You see SSGA in that lineup. But what I really want to tell you is that the top name in each of the programs, so whether it's SSGA or BlackRock or Goldman, those are target date funds. The investment options in these programs primarily are target date funds. That's about it. I mean, there are, minor, what I think of as distinguishing investment options, but just a handful, maybe a global equity, an ESG, a bond fund, a core equity fund, if you will. So I think that the states have, certainly on the auto IRA side, tried very, very hard to keep it simple. And then the only other thing that I think is interesting in listening to Courtney talk about the waves, and Lisa talk about it, both California and Oregon have erred on the side of a longer wave period, if you will, from 2.5 to 3 years. Courtney ended up with a shorter wave period in Illinois. It's something that I would encourage anybody thinking about it to talk to their state counterparts. Last slide here is just programs in development. And the only thing I really want to say here is that we think that the states obviously on the precipice of coming out next would be Connecticut, Maryland, and Vermont. And I think, the only thing I would point to here is that, once you issue an RFP, once you're in that procurement process, ideally it should move pretty quickly. I mean, an RFP is a 6 to 8 week time. There's 6 to 8 weeks for a company or bidders to respond to an RFP, and then it's really the evaluation process. So we're waiting for the Connecticut evaluation process, we're waiting for Vermont, and we're really just at the very start of Maryland, hasn't even been launched yet. So that gives you the overview of the programs in development. So the last thing I want to talk about, and I said I'd be quick, I'm sorry if I'm not. But the last thing I wanted to focus on then are what some of the best practices, if you will, some of the things that we see from our side of this as purely advisors to the states. And I don't really need to go over it again and again because I think this question, we've talked about this. Angela referred to it, Courtney's talked about it. Where you put that, the administrative authority matters. Think back to my pie chart on the infrastructure and who's responsible and what entity is going to help you accelerate the actual launch and implementation of a plan, where do you put it? Those are your considerations on the organizational side. One thing I also want to say, and it's on governance, but it goes to the legislative process. Angela mentioned it. She talked about ABLE, these ABLE programs for people with disabilities to save on a tax-advantaged basis. What we have seen in the ABLE market, it's really interesting, 45 states, including the District of Columbia, have launched an ABLE plan. So they're offering an ABLE solution to the people in their states. The reality is there are only 15 plans. And what's happened on the ABLE side is we see these incredible collaborations between the states, because it's a recognition that if you're in a small state with an uncertain magnitude of the market of people who are ultimately going to go into these programs, it may not be economically feasible to launch a plan on your own. And when I think about that, I think there are analogies here to the retirement market where, sometimes one of the hardest things I get the sense of is defining how big that pool of participants is in your program. So I think there's real, there is real potential for this collaborative model on the retirement side that we've seen so successfully on the ABLE side. People better than me have talked about startup funding, so I'm not going to hit that point home. Don't be cheap, because I do, it's worth the investment. Let me just see, because I don't want to repeat things that everyone else has hit home so well. We've talked about, just on the board initiatives, this really goes to that point I made. Not everyone on the board is a financial expert. Not everyone on the board is a retirement expert. Boards should bring a variety of experiences to the board. And people have to take their hats off, right? When they walk into that boardroom, because whoever appointed them doesn't matter. Their sole obligation and duty is to the participants in the program. But recognizing that, that's when education and training becomes important, because not everybody has that same level of expertise. The one other thing I would say with respect to, I'm messing up here. The one other thing when we think about organizational considerations is that you want to create a plan or a situation where you can bring in the professional staff who really brings the expertise to run one of these programs. So in Lisa's case, Lisa, when she went to the state of Oregon to launch that plan, Lisa brought years and years of experience from the investment side, financial services. When I think of a Katie Selensky, I think of Courtney, I think they bring really unique experiences to run these really challenging programs. On the procurement side, and maybe this seems like it's so far away for you guys, but it's just a couple, broad points that we always think about. Boards, procurement should be driven by board objectives and what boards want to accomplish and what the state wants to accomplish and the policies that that matter to the legislature when they first created these plans. So we always start when we begin a procurement by saying, what matters to you? You tell us what's the most important thing. Is it low cost? Is it ease of access? Is it sophistication? Whatever it is, they're your goals. I think it's important this goes back to outreach. This is a limited market. This is a market that's a challenging market. Yeah, there are a lot of record keepers, but there may be a lot of record keepers of varying levels of expertise and real expert and excellence in those record keepers. But our point is cast a wide net. Be sure a procurement process brings in as many people as possible, because that's what's going to give you better choices. And then I'm just going to jump on, operational, and this one seems so far away. If procurement's far away, operating is far away as well. But these are things that we think about from the best practice standpoint. That once you have that plan up and running, once that plan is out there and it matches what the legislature set out as its goals, you want to be sure that there are standards by which performance is measured, whether it's administrative or it's investment. You want to be sure that at the end of the day, the value proposition for the people you're trying to serve is really one that is valuable and one that meets and satisfies the goals that you set out to accomplish when you pass the legislation and put us on the path, or put the state of North Carolina on the path of solving the retirement crisis.